I would never have dreamt that my least favourite generation 911 in Targa form would be the car to give me my light bulb moment for Porsche as a brand. And it wasn't the first Porsche I've been exposed to. I'd driven others before. I'd been a passenger in a 911 GT3, 991, all sorts of things. But this was the car that made everything make sense. Luckily, since then, I've reviewed a 911 SC, one of the favourites of the air-cooled generation, a Cayman GT4, one of the favourites of today's generation, and the most affordable way to jump into the Porsche world with a classic Boxster. We're not here to say, is it overhyped, is it underhyped? We know these are brilliant, and we know their values are finally going back up again. But they're not that simple to own, and I want to really answer, regardless of how good they are, whether you're at the bottom trying to make your way up to a 911, or whether you've got budget above a 911, should you get one of these? So before we get started, a little contents of what's coming up. And surprise move, we're actually going to do the reliability and maintenance and stuff first. For engagement, I should leave it, but I think it's important for a lot of people to know whether they should proceed. So that'll be first. Then we're going to start the actual review. A little bit of history, I'm not going to go on a massive lesson, so I think we want to see what the car's all about. Interior, practicality, driving review, and not just the verdict, but a verdict where I'm really going to say, should you get the Boxster or one of these? Because people do like to debate whether you're getting 80% of the car or not. So let's find out. Obviously, really quickly, we'll talk about RMS and IMS and bore scoring and stuff, but that's really the tip of the iceberg. And that's why I felt compelled to start here. So I think a lot of us think if we can write those off, you're good to go, a few age-related things, everyone's happy. But I don't ever usually use my phone on a video, but the list is extensive and quite complicated. So do excuse me here. So Jez, friend of the channel, his DeLorean I've reviewed, and he's owned a few 996s. He's done superb videos of his ownership experiences, but he said to me, these are the things that I'd like to add retrospectively since owning his car longer. So number one, 996 values have been low for a very long time. As a result, many owners haven't spent the necessary money on preventative maintenance, and many cars are now facing big bills on things nothing to do with IMS, RMS or bore score. In other words, go shopping for a 996 and you'll discover that 80% of these cars on the market are dogs. These are typically the ones that live in that £10,000 to £15,000 price bracket. 2. These bills will likely be on things like suspension, which is complex front and rear, many arms in which the bushings will now be shot if not changed. That's before you even talk about shocks. Full refresh, £8,000 at a specialist. Brake lines, corrosion, £2,000. AC lines, corrosion, £1,000 to £2,000. Coolant lines, engine out job, £3,000. Body corrosion, cars were galvanised from factory, but many are now starting to rot. Check jacking points and inside of wheel arches with a torch. The costs could be big. RMS, IMS, bore score only affect a small number of cars, and these issues will affect all 996s as they are primarily age related. As an enthusiast car, one of the 20% out there that might have 20 grand in maintenance invoices over the last 5 years, these will only be worth 15 to 20 grand. So it's a small uplift in price from those early ones, but will be massive savings in your future costs, and it represents far better value. Ultimately, buy on condition, not mileage. That big folder of previous invoices is probably worth more than its weight. And finally, forget about IMS as an issue unless you're buying a sub 40,000 mile garage queen, and even then your risk is only about 3%. So what's it like being sat in a nearly 30-year-old 911? Well, honestly, I think there's pros and cons, and there's going to be some subjective taste in here as well, so you might disagree. But overall, it feels not quite vintage and not old yet and collectible. It doesn't feel quite modern. It feels a bit dated in places. That's my opinion. It's not offensive and it doesn't bother me. I just don't personally like it. On the other hand, it is still quite minimal and clean and simple, and had I not driven one yet and experienced at least my kind of new love for the brand, I'd probably be saying it's a bit boring, if I'm honest. Quality of materials are pretty good. I know this is in Porsche's kind of bean counting era, trying to save the company and save costs here and there, but I do like the carpet round here. Everything's good. These driving seats, they're actually great. I drove an Audi RS6, not yesterday, the day before, C7 2014, and I loved those seats. Aesthetically, I thought they were even cooler, but they didn't pinch and hold you as well as these ones do. So yeah, Big shout out to Porsche from the 90s. In terms of the actual size and the fit, I do love it. So when you're actually sat in here and driving, I actually think it's brilliant, aesthetics aside. It reminds me of an MX-5, but you don't feel like you've been shoehorned into a coffin like you do with an MX-5. It's breathable, but it feels purposeful, and you feel excited about the drive ahead. For a car that has such compact dimensions in comparison to today's sports cars, there's so much space. Rear seats, you can take adults 5'10" in the Targa for half an hour or so, because in the Targa you get a lot more space up here. And what's quite nice is the glass comes up. I didn't know this. There's actually a hatchback there, so much more accessible without having to constantly move your seats around. We all know the front boot frunk is actually pretty massive on these, considering what the car is, and so these cars are massively usable. But overall, I still love the fact it's within a really compact body. Like, it feels tiny on the road, which is so refreshing. I'm really impressed, not to my taste in places, but overall comfy and gets me excited to go for a drive. So let's do that. So you made it past the scary PSE video of don't do drugs, and you're here to do your drugs. Good stuff. I love this 911, and as I said before, I wasn't a brand fanatic. I don't just see why these things shine and forget to look at the bad bits. But it was a car that I got in it 50 meters down the road, 2 gear changes, and I was like, these are great, aren't they? And for context, I was on a caffeine and machine drive with friends, and I'd just been lucky enough to drive my brother's Kia Stinger GTS for probably 2.5 hours straight. And there've been some good times of really blatting that and pushing that quite hard. And it was just the instantaneous throttle response. The Miltech back box on this car particularly really allows it to sing without being ASBO, without being childish. Let's see how this thing sounds. Just love it. I just love it. Where do we begin? Well, I contemplated doing a history lesson and going through that stuff, but we're nearly 30 years in. I think most people know the story of these cars, and there's some very, very anal channels that will go through every minute detail. So I think I'll leave that up to them. What I will say is, first water-cooled car, still feels modern, decent size, and there's a little facelift. People like the earlier ones because of the throttle cabling on it and the immediate throttle response of those. The funny thing is, when I drove this car, I didn't know that it was the first gen, and the second gen like this is already so responsive anyway. I was sat here thinking, wow, this is what they talk about. So you're good either way. I don't think you're gonna cry. In this particular car, we've got the 3.6, gorgeous flat 6. 320 brake horsepower. In the Targa form, I think it's about 5.2 to 60. And I absolutely adore this amount of power, this amount of weight, a car of this size. It does not feel too dangerous for the public road. So on UK public roads, this power, this 0 to 60, this kind of power to weight ratio, it just works so brilliantly. In today's standards, this still is a fast car. You can't drive this and feel disappointed. And I would be amazed if most people really felt the need for more. I think we've just kind of got used to things having 400, 500, 600 horsepower and a lot of willy waving in pubs. This is so much fun. You don't have to convince yourself it's fast, and I love that. And it's not just about the speed, it's the sensation of speed. There's quite a lot of noise in the cabin. It's not as refined, in my opinion, as you might expect, but it's certainly not headache material and a bit silly in here either. I've got the window slightly cracked at the moment, and what I'll do is I'll cut it to just the lav mic, because I've got a nice XLR mic on the exhaust right now. So this is what it sounds like with the window slightly cracked. You get the idea, it's not too bad in here. But the nice thing is that noise comes in and it feels exciting. If you've driven anything modern lately, let's say that Kia Stinger GTS, a modern M car, even the 5-litre Mustang I drove recently, a lot of EU noise emissions, this and that, and turbocharged stuff. People are having to fake engine noise and blast it in through the speakers. That's where the world's gone now. And it's just so great that with this car, everything is authentic. I don't see a sport button in here. Not in this particular trim. The car is sport mode. It's great. It's not exhausting, but it's connected. Let's move away from engine and gearbox. 6-speed, by the way, lovely throw, really nice springiness, great weighting. I'm not sitting here kind of wishing it was any different, to be honest. Really, really love it. That engine is over the rear. News alert, by the way, in case you've been living under a rock. And it's the first rear engine car I think I've ever driven. Well, I had driven when I first drove this one. And I was kind of led to believe it'd be a little bit intimidating and scary because of 911s of old. And despite knowing these ones are a lot better, it's always at the back of your mind until you've really driven one. And as people have said before, it's slow in, fast out in the bends. And there's this sensation you get that's just, oh, I just love it, where you're going around the bend and you've got that power, kind of the weight is shifting towards the back, the rear is squatting a bit as you're putting the power down, and it's hard to describe. It just feels brilliant. There's something about the weight transfer in this car. It makes you feel like you're driving it, and like there's a certain skill curve to it, and you'll get better and better as time goes on. I feel like with the Boxster, for example, that to me doesn't quite feel as present. That car feels a little bit more, God, it's got to be another way of saying go-kart, hasn't there? But it's so stable. 5,000 RPM there, pulling like a champ. And we're not even at the 7,000 red line. God, it's brilliant, this car. It is absolutely superb. God, I could just drive this thing for hours and hours and hours. Right now, how does this feel compared to that Cayman GT4? In so many ways, completely different. In terms of joy and happiness, driving this thing, the same. There's a 40 grand difference. I just can't believe how accomplished the engineers have been for so long at Porsche, and how much they just have made this almost unique layout work so brilliantly for them. I've driven the DeLorean, which is rear-engined, 6-cylinder, you know, manual, everything else, and it's relatable in many ways to the SC, but yeah, nothing drives like this. The other thing I love about a car of this era, that kind of beautiful 90s and noughties era, we weren't obsessed with alloy size and wheel size yet. So there's a little bit of rubber on the wheels. It's not completely slammed to the ground. It's compliant and it's comfortable. And you can see why people love these things for long trips and for daily usage. It just doesn't feel like you've compromised that much to take this every day instead of a sensible car. Overall, I have to say, I just adore the way this drives. It's confidence inspiring in its size. You feel like you're wearing it, classic cliche, but you just do. And it's so quick that you just feel confident to get on with it and have a little bit of fun in this car. I don't think the brakes are that great. Now that could be an example, this exact example, it just could be that these brakes and discs need replacing. But given that Tom's been on top of maintenance pretty well with this, he's done a lot of preventative maintenance as well, I'd be amazed if he was driving around on old pads and old discs. But the brakes, I guess with aftermarket stuff, it would be almost certain you could get some superb things and be back in the game. enjoyed the production, if you've enjoyed my style of reviewing, if you've appreciated the microphone on the exhaust or anything like that, please do like and subscribe and all that jazz. Tom used to have a BMW Z4M, the convertible, and whilst it was an impressive car, my immediate honest impressions when I first drove that car, disappointment. I just expected more from it, I think, in every way. There was quite impressive steering, it was quite sure-footed on the road. This is just leagues ahead, leagues ahead. Well, I know that engine with a carbon airbox and a decent exhaust can sound incredible, but stock, it just didn't. Getting in this car, comfier, more confidence inspiring, better handling. I prefer the noise, more practical, great. I think a Z4M is actually cheaper to run and has less like surprises for you, and being a decade newer in some cases, I don't think you've got as many of those little kind of issues to think about with your maintenance. But I would still opt for one of these pretty much every day. Now, despite having a lot in common with those Boxster engines, it is its own unique engine, and I just marginally prefer the way these sound to all of the Boxsters I've driven, be it 987 or 986 S or otherwise. They still sound brilliant and you can't complain, but it might just be the cabin and the way that the sound travels and sticks in this. Oh, come on, Ben. This is not the best piece of road. It might look great, but it can be, there's a lot of undulation and unpredictability to it. It just flows so effortlessly down this road. However, there's also an element of you're on the edge of your seat. You're really thinking about every input as well. So it rewards you is what I think it does really well. And I haven't felt rewarded driving Boxsters before. I just love the way they drive. They're incredible propositions for what they're like to live with day to day, but yeah, these are great. So Tom has grown up idolising the 996 in his childhood, Top Gear days, and it's just something he's always wanted. So I'm really, really glad he's done it. I think it's a really special feeling to tick off a childhood dream car. But amazingly, he has been tempted to chop it up for something else. He knew the maintenance was going to come. He knew it was going to be expensive. He did have money set aside. But he said, you know, I've had the car for a year and 3 months, spent $5,000 on it. And he said, that's excluding tyres and excluding him putting the exhaust on, excluding him swapping the head unit out. He said, it's one of those things where you keep pulling on the thread and you discover more. So you take it to the specialist for them to do the X, and then they're like, now that we're here, we're looking around at Y and Z, and they're not in great condition, and really whilst we're here and we've done the labour to get here, it makes sense to do those things. I've said to him though, it hasn't ruined his ownership experience, by the way, it's made him ask questions, but I said to him, you've spent this money, don't just do this and hand it off to the next person, like enjoy the car. You know, you've got a delightful example here, it's in good nick, just enjoy it now. But these are just the things you have to think about. Personally, with my money, it's an interesting one. I haven't done the verdict yet, and that's where I'm going to really answer it. But if I wanted to get one of these, I think I would want to do it with a 20 grand budget. And I think that's quite healthy. At the same time, the real competition, in my eyes, is a Cayman. And I know they come with their own host of issues until the facelifts as well. But a 987 Cayman it's hard to argue. And once you get to that 20,000 bracket, you're kind of in 981 money as well. So these cars are a labour of love, but God, they're so special. If you're going up towards the 30k end, which obviously we're leaving 996 territory, I think I'd go for an Evora S. That thing has utterly blown me away, and I still think about that car all the time. Now, to conclude, the big question of would I buy one and should you buy one, and what would I do, Boxster versus 911? We're going to jump out and conclude there. And so to conclude the 996 911 review, now it's a bit of a complicated one really, isn't it? You can see why they're so loved and popular now, because they give you that classic car experience without it being too much of a classic car, you know, 80s and 90s and prior to that. They can still feel like a modern car that you can use every day. They've got that old school driving feel. They do feel different to modern Porsches, they really do. They're small, they're practical, and there's so much to love about these in Carrera 2 form. And frankly, I think the Targa is the bargain one to go for. One of the things I like seeing in the comments section is, I've had one of these for 26 years, I've had one of these for 17 years, I've loved mine for 12 years. Fantastic, because you came in at a point when it was quite an expensive car and you had the money to run it and you've looked after it really well all the way through to now. Great. So if that person is selling, you could pick up their car and it's probably going to be pretty good, but you do have to be careful. There's some really tempting ones out there, and the mileage might give you a slightly different picture to how it's doing underneath. I really would love to buy one of these one day, and I wouldn't rule it out, but I certainly wouldn't jump in with my eyes shut. I need a big bank account and a lot of love and patience to own this car. But they're so good. And when I compared that 50 grand 911 SC, if I had 40 or 50,000 pounds, I can then see why get one of these for 20 and have the best time and keep loads of cash for when things go wrong and go on road trips with it. That's to me when these make a lot of sense. As for the Boxster and whether it's a substitute 911, relatable in many ways, and Boxster owners can sleep well at night and enjoy their car for sure. But there is something extra special. They do drive differently. The way this goes around a corner and hunkers down with that engine weight over the rear, it feels more like you're driving a car, and there's a sense of reward about decent pace from A to B. I feel like a Boxster is actually a bit easier to drive in that sense, and not as much really happens with the chassis. Little minute details, but there is something extra special. So if you've got 8, 10, 12, 15 grand, I don't think get a 911. It's too much of a headache, I think, at that price. And at that point, you could be getting a really good Boxster or buying a decent one at 7 or 8 and having lots of budget left for headaches and for exciting road trips. So that's my advice. But those, of course, are my thoughts. And perhaps I'm biased because I don't have the money yet to afford one of these. Perhaps I'm more anxious than I should be. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear owners' thoughts, prospective buyers in the comments. What would you do? And if you weren't going to get one of these, what instead would you be buying? Do let me know. And join the Patreon. Would love to have some support there. I'm trying to do this full time. We've now broken the magic number where I can no longer fit all of my subscribers in the car in a 911. We have a few of us and I'd love to have a few more. So come along, like and subscribe. We'll see you on the next one.